If you want to support access to study scores, deep dives into the greatest composers of all time, and music education in general online, please consider donating to my Patreon. $1 a month will get you access to all the scores thus far. Who doesn't want to compose like Brian Wilson? He is arguably the greatest American composer of the 20th century, and the music he created with the Beach Boys has innovated countless aspects of contemporary music, including recording production techniques, musical form, instrumentation and orchestration, and a rich, unique harmony mixing classic American songbook, and rock and roll style harmonies. Like the great classical composers of old, Brian Wilson went through many creative arcs and eras with his music, and showed different sides of himself in each. While there is a lot to dive into, and enough material for multiple videos, comment below if you'd like me to make this a 2 or 3 part series, I feel the best way to understand how to compose like Brian Wilson is to take a piece from his peak era, chiefly 1966 to 1971, and pick it apart to truly understand the inner workings of his music. And what better piece to use as an example for our examination than the preeminent, epic, timeless Teenage Pocket Symphony of God Only Knows. Now, God Only Knows, I feel, is the perfect example to pick to understand how Brian Wilson composes, because it really has the whole shebang of elements that sets him apart from basically all of his other pop rock contemporaries, and still from most people today. Tchaikovsky-esque woodwinds, shifting and unstable harmony reminiscent of the development section of a symphony, and counterpoint doo-wop vocals all come together to create the first example of what Beach Boys manager Derek Taylor would refer to as a pocket symphony. Brian Wilson himself referred to God Only Knows as a, quote, teenage symphony to God, unquote. To fully understand why God Only Knows occupies this middling space between classical art music and pop rock, we have to dive in detail. To start off, let's take a look at the form of God Only Knows. If we take a deep look, we see a basic pop rock verse-chorus form with a few caveats. After the second chorus, we have a march theme that leads into a contrapuntal doo-wop vocal fugato figure. Additionally, while God Only Knows does have a chorus, due to said chorus's short nature, just 4 bars, it can be thought of as more of a refrain tacked on to the main verses of the song. We can then think of the verses as the main harmonic structural pillar. With the basic form laid out, let's now dive into the meat of the piece and what gives it its unique timeless character, the harmony. Harmony is furled melody. Melody is unfurled harmony. So said famous composer Alexander Scriabin, and that principle is no doubt what gives God Only Knows its singular musical quality. Before we get into a full harmonic analysis, I want to demonstrate the layout of the study score I have created, which will be available with just a $1 contribution on my Patreon, link in description. First, any prominent or important melodic elements will be situated at the top of the score. In the case of the intro, you can see the horn call here is highlighted. Secondly, the middle staff is written in a contemporary pop rock lead sheet style for analysis of chords for those of you who come from that background. Thirdly, the classical analysis is represented by the use of figured bass to understand how the fundamental bass of God Only Knows works with the outer or most prominent voices of the piece. In the majority of the cases, this is the vocal line, though not always. Now, with the brief explanation out of the way, let's get to the actual analyses. As we can see from the score, the piece opens with a majestic Wagner-esque horn call with light major key harmony in the key of E. One thing to note at the top of the piece is the use of chord inversions in the harmony. This is where the figured bass comes in. See the G sharp with the little 6 under it? This means we are building a chord with the intervals of a third and then a 6 above the fundamental bass note. Again, G sharp. It is important to note this, since G is the fundamental bass, we can incorporate that into our analysis of how the various parts of the intro play against each other. Taking a look at the horn call again, we see a B natural against the aforementioned fundamental bass of G sharp. And if we scroll forward, we notice that after the intervening note of an F sharp on beat 4, we land on an E while the fundamental bass moves up to A, an A major chord in root position. I've written these arrows here for a reason. In these two bars, between these voices, the rules of fundamental counterpoint and voice leading are loosely observed. As the bass moves upward from G sharp to A, the horn call, previously on F sharp, moves downward to E. In the principles of voice leading, there is a rule that approaching perfect consonances, for example, fifths, octaves, and unisons, one must move in contrary motion, i.e. the voices approach from different directions, in order for the overall motion to be smooth. Here we see Brian Wilson loosely, and again I say loosely, approximating this motion. While that in and of itself is not so much remarkable, the fact that none of his peers would write a similar figure in any of their songs does stand out. Now, there are quite a few things about this figure that do not strictly conform to actual counterpoint rules. Nonetheless, this light sprinkling or implication of counterpoint shows up throughout God Only Knows, and while it may not be a to-the-T perfect contrapuntal composition a la Bach or Max Reger, the fact that even this light implication made its way into a pop rock song is still quite a marvel. Further, for a stronger example of this, if we fast forward to bars 9 through 10, we see that as the fundamental bass moves from A, from a D major second inversion chord, to a B, we notice that the overlying melody of the vocal line ultimately moves from the imperfect consonants of a third, A and C sharp with neighbor tones of D, to a perfect consonance of an octave, B and B, by contrary motion. As a classical musician, I can see that part of what makes this song sound so sonorous is the subtle and light elements of proper voice leading that Brian Wilson employed when writing the song, consciously or not. Another element to note that Brian Wilson borrows from the common practice classical tradition throughout this song is the use of unstable and rapidly shifting key centers throughout the verses and chorus. In this way, it lightly imitates the development section of a sonata form piece, where composers often explored varying closely related key centers to add vitality and excitement to their pieces. Let's see how Brian Wilson does that here. First, as we mentioned earlier, the piece quite clearly starts in the key of E major, with a nice easy movement between the tonic and subdominant. However, as we transition into the verse, the progression walks up to a C major over G, the chromatic mediant of A, before transitioning us into the new key of the subdominant, A major. This transition is made deceptive due to the initial part of the verse starting on an inversion of the subdominant of our new key, that being D major in the key of A. This is then followed up by the chord B minor 6, which due to its shared common tones functions essentially as a 5 dominant E7 chord before we land on the relative minor of the key of A, F sharp minor, to emphasize the tonal center of the key at play here. We are then greeted with a C diminished 7th chord, which, if we invert and enharmonically transpose, we can see that we have a B7 flat 9 here, functioning as a dominant chord in the original home key of E. Finally, we see movement of E over B to B flat minor 7 flat 5, which at first seems perplexing. However, a bit of respelling and enharmonic transposition reveals that this chord can essentially be made to function as a C sharp minor 6 in an inverted position, therefore presenting us with the very typical pop rock progression of 1 to 6 minor, common in the doo-wop style of harmony. We then end the verse with the chorus refrain of God Only Knows What I'd Be Without You, using the harmony that opened the piece in the intro, restating a theme, as it were. In addition to these pseudo-classical techniques, Wilson shows his deftness at appropriating conventional jazzish harmonies to further the harmonic density of God Only Knows. For example, in bars 11 to 13, the use of a jazz 2-5-1 chord progression in the key of E is used to bring us back to the home key of E, after a brief stanza in the subdominant key of A that started the verse that we mentioned earlier. Notice how the chord of F sharp minor 7 is used as a pivot chord between the keys of A and E. In A, it functions as 6 minor, and in E, it functions as 2 minor. Aside from Brian Wilson's dynamic use of harmony, it's also important to point out how the lush orchestration of the piece elevates it into a higher plane than most other pop rock songs of the time, or since for that matter. As we mentioned earlier, the piece starts out with a Wagner-like horn call, but that is not the only element to be found in God Only Knows that calls back to the beauty of late Romanticism. Upon a repeat of the verse section of the song, this beautiful Tchaikovsky-esque figure is played in the flutes. Additionally, The influence of Tchaikovsky shows up again during the, quote, march section that takes place after the second chorus. What's so interesting about this section to me is that while the piece features orchestration and rhythms that call back to the Nutcracker, the underlying harmonic movement of 1 to flat 7 to 1 is a thoroughly pop rock progression that certainly would not have appeared frequently in the language of a common practice composer like Tchaikovsky. And so, these are some of the elements that make God Only Knows the masterpiece that it is. I hope in analyzing Brian Wilson's composition methods and techniques, as shown here in God Only Knows, you all can see why he is such a singular artist-composer in the context of 20th century pop rock. If you like this video, please subscribe, leave a like, and let me know in the comments what artist or composer you would like me to cover next. Thank you, and stay composing.